This is an interactive story time. So we get to tell parts of it, and then you have to add to it as we go, all right? Because you've all met us, right? You know about our memories. They're legendary in like the bad way. So we're trying to do a memory thing, a remembering thing, and we're probably gonna do a terrible job at it. So I would like you to fill in blanks, help us with these memories. But the way to tie this in with what we've been talking about is that Daniel and his friends found themselves in the middle of a story of what God was doing. And one of the interesting comments that we've been hearing for New Hope is that, like, what's all this new talk about being missional? What's all this new talk of mission? And from the day the church was founded, it's been God continuing to put together a group of people who are people helping people to help people. It's like a continuation. But like we said, we feel like we've been transplanted and the world around us is changing. And so as it has, and as our lives have changed, we feel the need to continually find a way to be relevant, to reach people for Jesus. So that requires different implementation of the same gospel, same heart. So in some ways, we don't think that anything new is at New Hope, and in some ways it feels like everything is different at New Hope. And that's a weird sort of thing. Maybe you can help us kind of flesh out what is even actually different and what isn't. But we also know that there's many who are newer to the church. So for us, parts of this story are very familiar. Told 1,000 times, thought about it, and you've never heard some pieces of it. So we thought it might be really helpful to just go back even 5 or 6 years, this last season, of where God has really been kind of pushing things in new directions and put some things on kind of a timeline, a virtual timeline, to say, oh, look how God did this. Do you remember this? Oh, this is a way that God has been leading. Oh, this is something that God did. Small steps in the exact same direction for a really, really long time. Because I feel like Satan could totally work in this mix, oh, look what the pandemic did. As if God's working in our lives is a result of reaction to a pandemic in the world. God's got to get way more glory than that. And if he was doing something before and he wants to get back to doing what he's doing and he's moving us towards it, I don't want any of us to feel like we've stopped doing what God is calling us to do. Or the pandemic gave us some new ideas. And maybe you even joined us during that time, the past few years. We want to share more of the story. So this is like Daniel. This is in stepping into the middle of a story of what God has been doing. And sharing as many memories as we can and gleaning as many memories as we can from you as to the ways that God has been pushing us in this direction and teaching us things for a really exciting things for a really, really long time, for 5 or 6 years.
Really long time. Yeah. For you and I specifically, though, because if you guys didn't know, we met at New Hope when I was 5 years old. Yeah. And
I was 11, okay?
Yeah.
I was pretty old.
Yeah. It wouldn't have worked out then. But today is our 17th wedding anniversary.
That's right.
So, I know, yeah. But I think that's appropriate. It just so happens that we just so happened to be sitting here talking to you guys about the story and our love for New Hope has just always been. This has always been where I've been in church. So, yeah. Felt apropos to let you know that.
So I would start this story by a pastoral perspective from 6 years ago or so, saying that I've been a pastor here for 14 or 15 years or something like that. And during that time, I have seen the engagement from the community to us go from hero to zero. It used to be I could just be here and people would call, I'm looking for some counseling. Those calls do not come anymore, and they haven't for 5 or 6 years. It used to be there'd be 4 or 5 people oh, you have such a pretty white chapel. Would you do weddings there? Would you be able to officiate? And I'm ooh, someone who thinks they're coming for a wedding and who's really going to get basic discipleship. Excellent. I require 4 meetings prior to the wedding for us to do it. Great. And then I'd have 4 chances to tell them about Jesus and talk about it and teach them things they never know. It's this engagement just by virtue of having a Christian chapel. Counseling, weddings, youth events, fall festivals, just put a popcorn machine in a dunk tank in the back and 100 people show up. That doesn't happen anymore. And it hasn't happened for a really long time. Years. We're still here, so if those things did still happen, I would be the one to get the call and I would tell you they're happening. They don't happen anymore. They don't happen anymore. It's oh, just by being here was an engagement with the community for a long time. Just by having programs that people could seek out was working. And I saw it working less and less. And so I would kind of behind the scenes. Maybe you were here at that time, maybe you weren't. You might even attend events and feel like, oh, this is going well, there's things happening. But for me, behind the scenes, I'm like, why is everything 20 times harder for 5% of the results that it used to be? It's the same stuff, it's good stuff. And so I started feeling frustrated. And so we started, well, let's teach about it. Let's talk, how can we be more engaged? And right around that time, God led Danny and I. Danny, you're there, you're sleeping. He's gone. Oh, he ran for the hills. Good, I can say whatever I want about him. So it was this time Danny dressed up like a clown and he had a hula. No, just kidding. He and I went to a pastor's conference and it was led by someone named Neil Hudson, who, these are books that we're probably going to refer to and ones you should read every single one of. If you get them done by next week, I'll be really impressed, but if it takes you 2 weeks, that's fine also. Neil Hudson, Imagine Church. This was one of the first links in the chain because this man is from England. England is where America is going. They used to be really religious, and now they're after that. But there's still Christians trying to be Christian in that place that they've had their fill of religion. They've seen crusades. They've been around a long time, and they're post-Christian. They're after that. But Christians still want to be Christian in it. And so there's a lot of wisdom from Britain and Great Britain and England to us that we should be observing from over the sea because it's just a steady push towards secularism and humanism. All those things, they go slowly, but they don't stop. So they're ahead of us in the learning curve. So he had this concept of front lines. And if you were at a lakeside family retreat back in 2017, you would have been led through fruitfulness on the front lines as our guest speaker for that church retreat out in Western Massachusetts, led by none other than Neil Hudson and all his group. Because in 2016, Dan and I are like, how can we get more engaged? So what's this, 21, so that's 5 years ago, 6 years ago? I'm terrible at math, something like that.
You are terrible.
I am terrible at math. That led us to say, well, okay, let's encourage people to be more active on their front lines. So if you're a nurse, talk to your nurse friends. If you are a musician, talk to the people in your band. If you're a student, talk to your friends. But we realized without equipping someone how to do that, and without learning together, that hardly ever happens. So just to put a real blunt note on this, if this happened 6 years ago, for all of us who have been part of this church family over the last 6 years, how many of us have led anybody to Christ on our front line? How many of us have baptized anyone on our front line? It's we can just ask that question. And we don't have to feel like we're the worst Christians in the world, we're failing. No. But if that's a hard field to hoe, if that's not where we're finding the fruit, can we try many different things? Could we try things even together instead of saying, nurse, stand alone. Remember every Bible verse. Be the answer man in that situation. What could we do that are other ways to encounter the world that aren't just at work? The work is kind of your responsibility. You're there. Do that. But is that the only way then we're going to engage? And so we felt well, let's talk about this. And then we had a small group series. You remember we broke everybody up? Danny and I actually did a bingo kind of drawing. We drew names out of a hat. Because we felt if we just said, find some friends, then everybody would just group of people who they know, and a lot of people had changed in the church. Let's mix it up. And we asked you for permission on this, remember that. Everybody said okay. So we put the names in the hat and split up, and it was about living on the front lines and being missional Christianity. That was 2018, I think. And small groups being what they were, people had a hard time getting to them. People didn't really do much with what we learned because it was mostly just information. It's not to your life, it's theory, and then you got to go and do something with it, which takes a lot of initiative, a lot of extra time. And people faded out. It's too far to drive to get to someone's home. So we're pushing forward in a way to try to be more engaged with this world that's changed. We feel it's slipping. But we are called to make disciples. So it can't slip. It's not an option. Got to grab. So what could happen? What could we do? And so then we started doing things as a full-body church. Instead of having our Thanksgiving meal here, we went and had Thanksgiving at the homeless shelter. So instead of being 80 of us here, there was 110 of us there. And there was homeless friends sitting alongside church folk and singing songs and sharing stories. And it was us plus, right? So we learned together. We did something together. Or some of the other homeless things, we did a collection of socks and whatever during that time thing. Okay, instead of asking each of us to just take the initiative on our own and just be that in our workplace without any real equipping, or without anybody with you, and instead of us saying, let's do small groups, which are hard to maintain and people are busy and it's hard, well then just, let's do things all together. But then it was well, we only have each other on Sundays, so we're going to have to trade some of our worship services if we want to find times where everybody's going to be there. And then that was a rub. I don't want to give away my Sundays. I really like those suckers. Right? But if we only have one thing to give, what's it going to be? Maybe we have two, maybe we have three, but if it's a small number, better be really thoughtful about it. And so we're just trying things. How can we be engaged in the world? How can we reach out? And so there was that, then there was seasons of foster care where we did encouragement bags, and we gave them out to 50 or 80 people in the Brockton DCF foster care department. So this is the broad brush. We can fill in many, many stories along the way, but as we're starting to do these things together, wow, that person said that they were blessed. We shared the gospel with this, and we met this person that we never would have, that wouldn't have come to church. Okay, our engagement. And then as Serve Home, 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, we're in people's lives that we would never have a chance to be, just loving them. And so we're okay, there's action, there's some sort of engagement. These are trying, and then pandemic put us in our homes. All right, divide and conquer. Let's figure something out. But now we're finding that we're too divided. We want to come back together. I think that's a beautiful thing, but we're faced with some of the bigger questions. How do we be together and also be in the world? Because we can't be just the Christian bubble. And that's never been our desire. I remember Danny having some thing that he wrote in one of the annual reports back in that 2016-17 time thing. I really feel God is calling us to be sent ones and to become less comfortable. Something along those lines, right? So why did God put that in his heart then? Right? Why did God give us the concept of being in homes and gathering and then have us prepared so wonderfully for a pandemic where we could just do what we'd been thinking about and try these things? There's this thoughtful progression by God, and we're just at the next stop of it. And some things we learn, we're it didn't work as well. Some things oh, that's got potential. Let's explore that. But it has to continually look like loving God and loving our neighbors. But that's how New Hope's always been. It is the same thing. We're just trying to find new ways, which is why it feels unknown. Because how you go about meeting a neighbor these days is different than how you go about meeting a neighbor in the past. How you go about being in the church is different. So those are I'll say one more thing and then I'm just turn it over to you. But the one book that came on a day of prayer and fasting for me, I've referred to you before, I'll just refer it again. It's called Canoeing the Mountains. And there was, after I came back from our last sabbatical in 2017, I think, I would find myself so curious, how do we serve the Lord? How are we going to do it? And I'd be up here supposed to be pacing and preparing my sermon, but instead all I could think about is, so I'm just going to say another group of Christian words to Christians. Good, but where's that going? What's the next step? How do we do more than that? And why do things seem so hard? And I got a call from Michelle saying that my Aunt Diana sent me a book, and she had flipped through while she was sitting in the car, I think, waiting for kids to pick up from school.
I always open his mail.
I don't like mail. I never open mail. That's her job. I can't stand that. Just feels like more I'm going to have to do or somebody that needs something, so I don't like it. So Canoeing the Mountains is this book from a pastor that said, the way he sees the nation of America is very much like Lewis and Clark. Remember the explorers? They started at the Atlantic and they were trying to get the Pacific, and they thought that the Mississippi River was going to go the whole way. And so they prepared a whole expedition on canoes because it's a water travel mission. We got to get from A to B in boats. So they learned how to be boaters and canoers, and they packed and they trained. And then they got halfway and they hit the Rocky Mountains. Their same travel took them to some place that they were not equipped. So they had a decision. We can't continue canoeing, but our whole mentality is built upon this skill set. So we either have to just go back and stay on the water that we know, or we have to learn how to climb mountains. We have to learn how to trudge across the plains, carrying our stuff. We have to engage with people like Sacagawea and the natives that are there in that land and let them teach us how to cross this if we want to get. So what do we want? Do we want to get where we were trying to go, or do we want to do what we've been doing? They found that they were trying to canoe, but the terrain around them had changed so much they found themselves in the mountains, and you can't canoe in the mountains. Can't canoe the mountains. And I feel like this is just a wonderful metaphor for the church. And so I'm here agonizing, God, tell me what's going on. I go home, get this book, and just voraciously absorbed it. And it was like God had given me answers to the exact, and it was we haven't all just done it wrong. We haven't all made big mistakes. We haven't all just failed. The world has changed, but we are still called to reach the world. So we just got to learn how to climb mountains. Very shortly after that, you will notice that a logo was developed, which has some mountain peaks on it as part of our church metaphor. Very shortly thereafter, you'll see that we're trying to talk about mission, being and doing. And then we wrestle, what's the balance? Am I just a worker for Jesus, or am I beloved? And how do we do work in faith? Awesome. Let's always ask those questions. But this book was like a pivotal turning point for me. And if you want to read someone, he's still referred to by tons of other people in these other books as someone who just like hit the nail on the head to describe our world. And so we need mountain climbers. And there may be some of us and some friends of ours who just really know the canoeing best. And so they stay with that. Well, there's still people along the rivers. But more and more, the rivers are going to recede, and there's going to be less and less canoeing available. And so over time, we're all going to have to learn to be mountain climbers. So this is like the progression, same heart, changing world. This book was huge, and those are some of the like milestones along the way.
Well, I'm just going to add, which is something you've drawn before a number of times, because to me, this is how I conceptualize like the changing landscape of the world right now, which is that this used to be the case, that people came to church, like new people who didn't believe, curious people, but there's not as much of the people coming into church besides the Christian people. So we come here, and that's wonderful, and it's beautiful, and we should come together. But what about everybody else? So my big question that like I can't stop caring about and thinking about, and I...
You want me to write that for you?
No, don't write
Okay.
that.
All right. Just trying to be helpful.
So, like, it's easy to focus on what goes on in these walls, but I can't stop thinking about the Great Commission. Very important teaching point of Jesus, which was that we've got to go and make disciples, right? So when we're here, we aren't making new disciples. We're not meeting the marginalized. Like, who are the people that Jesus spent the most time with?
Right.
Who? No, literally, who? The lost, yeah. So who else? His disciples, yeah. So that's us. We're equipped. We have what we need. Who did he spend time with? The sick.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Tax collector.
The unloved. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the people he was spending the most time with were the outcast, the lonely, the sick,
The abused.
the abused. Yeah. And those people are out there. And so we always have to ask the question, this matters here together, but out there is what like God has sent us to, which is why it's both. Dave talked about us being on mission. We're the missionaries, right? We've been talking about we're the missionaries because we are. And so in our daily lives and the places that we land, all of the things we do are for Jesus and us being missional in our lives, being light, being hope, being peace to the people who we meet at work, in our families, soccer fields, whatever. But like the church is also on mission. It's not just us. Like our church is on mission in the community. It's important that our church isn't just self-feeding and self-serving for us. It's important that it goes out, which means that we've got to be all these guys. So that to me is like, that's the biggest question. We have Sunday mornings together. And so that doesn't answer the question here. So then how do we answer the question? That to me is just like the most exciting thing. How do we answer that question? How does the church, not just our church, I mean like the church, Big C Church, like how does the Big C Church answer the question of the lost? Because there's more and more and more people who are less and less and less interested in faith.
Right.
Less and less and less interested in God, and they're hopeless. Like they more and more and more than ever need him and need something that makes sense. They need purpose. They need help. So if they're not coming here, if we don't feel like the next generation is going to be so excited because they're just going to like love that they're going to church, like, is that true? Do we feel like the next generations that are coming up are like, can't wait to go to church. I love church. I love going. Like, I hope my kids feel that way to some degree.
Some days, yes, some days, no.
But I think what they love is that they're doing something that matters to other people, right? Like, some of our favorite memories over the past 3 years, what are they? Like, for you guys, what are the things that have meant the most to you in your faith over the past few years?
Helping people.
Helping people?
Yeah. It feels good.
We're created to do it. We're created to do it. Like I shared last week, we're like God's workmanship, right? Like He created us to do good works. I read something interesting, actually. I decided to read James this morning. I love James. Mostly because he's like so hardcore. So he said, I was reading the Amplified version of James, I think it was chapter 2, and he was talking about how the way they translated it in that version was that you are spiritually shallow if you think that you can have faith without works. And I was like, ooh, that's an interesting way to say that. Like, ouch, also, like spiritually shallow. So he said that like our works are our evidence of our faith. Right? So like that's our evidence. Like all of the things that we have been able to go and do because of like the weird pandemic time and the flexibility of our lives and schedules. Like we had a lot more time, didn't we? And we weren't always here. And so we're like, ooh, surplus. Like, ooh. And we were able to do so much more and help so many more people. And that felt so like rich.
Exciting.
And exciting and beautiful. So he says the works are our evidence and our works are our obedience. And so a lot of times, like, we don't like the word works. I don't. I think it's kind of like a weird word. Like, works, I must do things. Like, I must do things. But he was talking about Abraham in there. His example of faith and works was Abraham. So what, like, project did Abraham do? What did Abraham do? What was the thing that he did? Who did he bring where? Yeah, his works was obedience, listening to what God asked him to do. God asked him to do something. That thing was just like go on a trip with his kid to like sacrifice him, but that was like what James's example was of works. So like I want us to be like very careful when we think about mission and works. It's not just particular things. It's an obedience to what God is asking you to do.
Right.
An obedience. So like when you hear that little voice that's like, this person's really sad, you should probably encourage them. That is obedience. Doing that thing is obedience. When you feel like someone's sharing something with you, and it's that weird moment where you're like, oh, I should probably pray for this person, but you're like, well, I gotta go, and you don't, that's not obedience. Like, obedience is just saying, like, God's telling me to do something. It could be cook a meal. It could be paint a picture. It could be call somebody who's on your mind. Like, an obedience to what God is doing and how he's moving in your life. Our genuine faith produces works, produces action, and it produces obedience. So that, to me, is kind of the important thing. It's like, how are we going to be, as a church, just obedient to what God is saying and to what God is doing, and to just be open to it? Because I don't exactly know. Like, we've been talking about discerning, right? Like, we had the Raposos share their story of discerning God's will for them a couple weeks ago. Right. And like, what a beautiful thing to just hear about all those little things along the way that God like said and did. And they're all very like particular and small, but when you put them all together and you look at it, you're like, whoa, God was really doing something right there. Like, despite even like my feelings about it, because I'm sure most of us would be like, can you knock out? Like, because we would like you to stay because we really love you. So that's not about our feelings, though. It's about, like, when God does something, you just, like, listen, hear it, like trust it, and be obedient with it. So like this time for us is like, I look at it like the Ebenezers, and like we're all the Israelites a little bit, maybe post-COVID, wandering a little bit in the wilderness, feeling like we had to upend all of church, right? Like we had to ask all the questions. Like, does it matter if we gather on Sunday? Does it matter if like we collectively get together as a whole body? Is it okay if we're in small pockets of people? Like we were just testing lots of things, being like, let's experiment. What does this work out to do? Because all of us really loved missional communities, but we also really loved getting together. So we're like, well, how can we do everything? It's hard to do everything. So these are like, we're stacking rocks because like when God does things along the way, we want to like remember. And Dave and I have been like stacking rocks in the wilderness for a long time, being kind of like, this God did a thing here. Yeah. We don't exactly know what it means. Right. But now at this point in 2021, like hindsight, when you start looking back, like when the Raposos were doing that, I was like, I want to look back. Yeah. So we decided like, well, let's start really thinking about all of these things that we've experienced along the way, that we've collected, all of these little God moments. That book coming in the mail for Dave, like he was literally here pacing around, fasting, praying, whatever, like just like feeling like, whoa! And I always open his mail. But you know, we don't always read the books that Diana sends. Sometimes we've already read them. Sometimes just kind of like, well, it's not really for me. I'm going to give this to someone. I started reading the back of this jacket only because I was waiting for my kids at school and being like, what's this book? Am I going to have to put this in the donate pile or am I going to give this to Dave? And I started reading it and I immediately called him. I was like, this book, babe, this is what we're talking about. This is what we're talking about. This is the thing. So, like, we need to remember those moments because when things feel unsettled and we're like, oh, I don't know what God's doing, I don't know if I like it, when we can look back at all the rocks that we've stacked in the desert and be like, right, God did that. Like, God has been preparing our church for, like, whatever is to come for 15 years. Like, for 15 years. Not for even 5 and not for even 7, but for 15 years. We can go all the way back and look and be like, wow, this is what led to that. This is what led to that.
Let's do a couple of those. Do you remember Hands of Hope?
Hands of Hope?
Hands of Hope was a whole ministry of our church where we wanted to go out and do things in the community. So Jason Brolsma and Ed and others helped coordinate. We tried to do like 4 or 5 a year. We just go out and do stuff. Like that's this. Same. Different name, different sort of approach, same. Danny, do you remember this book? This is by Tim Keller about how he, as a pastor in New York City, wanted their church to actually be relevant, the center of that city, instead of just like an irrelevant Christian group, and had the theology behind it. Well, Ian, you might have been in that group. Devin, you might have been in that group. We met in my office. Andy, you were in that group. Conrad, who's downstairs, was in that group. Like, why did Josh Vining, who was being discipled as a youth pastor in his church, tell me this is what they use in Waters Church to disciple their leaders? Why did I read it and like it? Why did we get together? Why did we study? What does it mean to be relevant to our context and our culture? Why was that like a focus? We weren't like, something wasn't broken at that point. We were just like hungry. And I was like, that's a cool thing. And all of you said, yeah, I want to be a part of that. Right? This is a piece of that puzzle. There's so many in here. I'll say something about the discernment piece. Maybe I won't even go to any more books. Oh, how about this one? Letters to the Church by Francis Chan.
Oof, that's a...
Want to talk about canoeing the mountains? This is a man who was a pastor of a church in California, like mega, author, prolific speaker, like the pinnacle. And he's like, oh man, but it's losing like the heart of what church is supposed to be. And he left that and started a house church network. And then he eventually let them kind of like run their own thing. And he just went and became a missionary to China. Like, okay. Like that's a path that you don't see too often. But his story to the church is, let's think about why we do what we do. Let's think about what's happening in the church. Let me read the copyright. When is this written? 2001. What do you got, Corey?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And his church is now like, they get together in somewhere in California, like a big city in California.
Okay.
They meet very shortly, and then they go out into the city, and their Sunday mornings is just evangelizing to folks.
Now, if you've heard Francis chant, thank you. I had no idea about that. But isn't that just like the exploration? It like takes you from one thing to the next, and you're in a thing for a while because it's like where God's calling you, but it isn't always the same thing. The people that we visited in Philly, Danny said that the way she pictures God's call is just Christians being on call. And I was like, ooh, that's good. Because a calling feels more formal. I'm called to this ministry, I'm called to this thing, but what if you're just on call and God can ring your number at any second? You know, pagers, remember pagers, right? Bzzz, on call. That's when you like think you should call someone, when you see someone who's needy, when you just see there's kids that need to be raised in the Lord. Oh, there's a need, it's like bzzz, you're on call. You've been like called into action. So that discernment process needs to be wide open. Our like radar needs to be up, watching for those moments. And that's a beautiful expression too. But his sort of description of church was powerful. Highly recommend. 5 stars, thumbs up. Like, subscribe. Anything else? What are some memories over the last years? Like, what have you seen that's felt like gradual growth in this direction, trying to adapt to this world? Throw some stuff out there. It doesn't have to be a long spiel thing. We're long-winded. You don't have to be.
The comment about pager. Well, I was in the hospital for 2 weeks. Every oncology nurse wears a pager. Now, they've got their cell phone because the needs are so great instantaneously that they could be in my room checking vitals. Pager goes off and they leave. And just to build on it, you know, that if that's the symbolism, that it's a pager, we have to be ready at a moment's notice.
Right.
Not the text that we don't check for 3 hours, or the emails that we don't check for 3 weeks, but a page.
Yeah, you're right. Absolutely right. What else? Dan, you want to throw in some more memories along the way? Others who have seen steps in this direction, same heart, different exploration?
This isn't a memory, and I'm not comfortable doing this, but I feel like I have a word from the Lord.
Okay,
And I feel
good.
like he's saying to us as a church and to each one of us individually, I have more for you.
Amen.
That was my word. More.
Was it?
Yeah.
When was that?
A few years ago. Because I just kept having this feeling like what we're doing is good. And it can even be beautiful, but it's just not enough. I feel like there's more for us, but it requires us to not be afraid.
And it's like not even about stuff. If anybody's got that in their head, get it out of your head. It's not about stuff. It's about what Dave talked about, obedience.
Yeah.
Because with obedience comes growth and joy.
Right.
Amen.
Right.
Amen to that.
I think the missional mindset could cloud over to Miss Sally just more. So I was just going to say more even for us spiritually. So more community, more missional, more go make disciples, period. But imagine what it's going to do for us. I want to get uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I hate being uncomfortable. But I feel that we're called. We've been called all along. But I think it's been preparation, like you said. We haven't done anything wrong.
Nope.
We're not going to do anything wrong.
It's not about that.
Right, so I'd love for that just to, but there's fear, right? People have fear.
We all do.
The thought of, I'm just going to say it, because the thought of not being here on Sunday, quite frankly, would piss me off. Yeah, just
That's
to be
all
honest,
right.
that's my heart. I literally thought, and I'm like always late, and someone's going to come. So who am I to be like, what? So, but that is only because I find now being here on Sundays with everyone is now even missional and building me and preparing me and to get uncomfortable. So it matters, it definitely matters, but I definitely think New Hope has been being called, I agree with you, all these years, and thank you for sharing those stepping, because I remember that we'll probably all go in on, I hope everyone goes home and has that memory.
Yeah, that would be great to continue
after,
this.
Keep thinking about this, because how wonderful to be uncomfortable in your faith. I don't believe we're called to be any other way. It's too safe. It's too safe. And I don't want to get there and be like, thanks for making everything safe. You know? And I guess we have to be willing to be persecuted and to be looked at and to be mocked and to be whatever to go out and be the church. So,
And you're reminding me of a metaphor that you made over the past few days when we were with friends about how, like, when we have a work to do or a job, you know, you maybe do training to start a new job. How, like, effective is the training that you do to, like, actually really do the job? Usually, like, not very.
Sort of.
Like, kind of. And so you're like, okay. Like, the way we learn and the way we exercise our faith is by going out and actually doing the things that Jesus talked about and that we've learned about for our whole lives. We have to exercise that faith, and our training as disciples and the growing of our faith is only going to happen when we are out doing our faith. Right. We can learn until it comes out of our ears, and it doesn't matter unless we're, like, faced with a problem that because of someone who has another problem. We're learning and growing and being challenged always by the doing of our faith.
Reminds me of the tests that you've taken, real quick. I'm going to let you guys go. Maddie, the cumulative tests, where it's like they can ask you any question on anything you've learned for, like, your whole college career. It's like, that's not fair. But that's what we do to Christians all the time. Learn everything there is about the Bible, and then when you get into a certain situation, I hope you remember that thing that you learned so you can have the right answer. It's like, that's not fair. None of us can do that. But if it's like, here's where I'm stuck, what's the Bible say? Then it's one lesson, it's perfectly applicable, you'll never forget that, and that's kind of, unfortunately, we do it the other way around too much. Learn everything, don't forget anything. Good luck in life. So anyway, yeah, Sandra,
I think
Devin?
one of the things that I was thinking of is just over the years is when we do our missional, you know, whatever it is, wherever it is, there's always been so much joy in doing it.
There is.
And that especially, and I was thinking learn by doing, because I was thinking about the teens and the kids.
Yeah.
And, you know, they learn so much more by doing, and there's so much more growth in the doing.
Yeah.
There's so much more spiritual growth. How would a young teen girl ever think to pray for someone? You just don't go up on the street and pray for someone.
Right.
But man, she did it. You know, like there's growth there. It's just I think. And I'm with you, Tracy, like on the balance of both. But there's so much more growth out there. So much more. And we're not, that's just our benefit. But what we're giving is their benefit. And and that's where the joy comes from. Because when you know, we're all suffering a little bit, right? But the best way out of your own suffering is to do something for somebody else.
Yeah, amen to that.
Amen. Devin, what were you thinking?
Yeah.
So with Serve Home, I think, you know, it's easy to think of it being part of our journey as, you know, we were in the community, we're doing things, the kids were involved. But for me, it was special because it was one of the first times that I thought of myself as more than just a member of this group. You know, New Hope is an entity. We weren't just doing things because we were New Hope. We were children of God. We were doing God's work. And we partnered with other churches.
That's a good word.
It wasn't just about any one of us.
That's important. It's like really important. That's anti-tribalism. That's anti-self-identity. That's anti-narcissism. That's anti-protect and defend. That's anti-steal sheep from other churches so ours can grow. It's anti all that yucky stuff. And it's pro-kingdom. It's pro-God. It's pro-body of Christ. Yes.
Nikki, hold on. Yep.
I was just going to share that in brief, just that God's been speaking to me about his glory too, and what that means. And I think about that phrase, what about the lost? And we care because God created everyone in his image, and so we care about these created beings. But social justice is all around us, everywhere, and it's not rooted in Jesus, right? People can care about lost, hurting, suffering people without Jesus. People can care and can go on social justice. And so God's been bringing me back to his word about his glory. And so, yes, we care about the lost because they're created in his image and we want them to be a part of the kingdom. But I think the larger umbrella is that it brings God more glory. We want to see growth in the kingdom, not just because we want to see people not suffering. Sure, we want to see that, but it's not actually about us not suffering anymore. It's about bringing God more glory. And like, it'd be interesting. I'd be curious, and maybe I will look through Scripture to see like how many times is glory mentioned. Like the glory of God is the ultimate goal. Like God cares about glorifying Himself. It's like all about Him.
Yep.
And so our church has to be about, the church has to be about bringing more glory to Him. And so we bring glory to Him through being here and through seeing growth in the kingdom, because that brings more glory to Him. So
There's a Westminster Catechism, which is used by many denominations, and their first question of the shorter Westminster Catechism is, what is man's chief end?
To glorify God and enjoy Him forever.
To glorify God and enjoy Him forever. I just can't help but thinking about that. There's the joy. There's the glory. It does marry together. That's the best version of all of it. But it is about Him. Such a good word. Such a good word. Did you have something real quick and then someone else?
Yeah, just real quick. I want a word of encouragement too. If the thought process of how many people are going to go and read about this, and I'm speaking about New Hope in general, and sadly some families have to move or drop all that, right? And if it gets small and there's 5, don't have fear. God will do mighty things with 5. It doesn't matter about the numbers that people see, and again, I'm saying, elephant in the room. If only 5 people come to church next Sunday, guess what? Don't be fearful. Don't be. Because if we're being obedient, right, and we're walking towards what His plan is, throw us in the fire.
That's right.
Let the lions come.
Nothing
Let
left
them
to
say
lose.
what they want. Let them whatever. But just be encouraged, and don't let fear in numbers play a part of this new place that we're going.
Yeah, totally agree. Totally agree. Rose, what were you going to say?
I was thinking of what you said and how people should glorify God. But in case someone doesn't love God because they don't know God, they can love someone they don't know, then they can still smell God. When you do something out of your heart for someone else, and there's no, interest there, they can smell God.
Yeah, the fragrance of Christ.
That's right.
They call it the fragrance of Christ. Yeah, in Scripture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe a sweet aroma to the world. Yeah.
Daniel, we don't know how many noblemen and young men were taken, but I have to believe it was more than just Belshazzar, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, and yet they're the testimony.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. He doesn't need 100 people. He doesn't need a giant army. Gideon.
Right. Gideon.
Yeah. Or Gideon. Yeah, Mom.
Things come to me hard, and sometimes I have you just get used to things the way they were. And you fight for the way they were. If I had my way, Michelle would still be 5 and we'd be coming into the church for the first time, because I don't like change.
I was really cute when I was 5. That's why.
But over time, things stink. And one of the things that I keep hearing is, we've all been brought here and we've been trained and trained and trained and trained and trained. It's like sending someone to medical school and keeping them there all the time and never sending them out to actually treat someone in hospital.
Yeah.
So I think what, is God talking to me saying, this isn't going to be the same. This is going to be different. However different it's going to be, I don't know. But, we need you to hear that, we need to be out there in the community, helping people in all different ways, shapes, and forms. But, miracles have been coming. I've been here for, 35 years, whatever it's been. And I've seen miracles from, I sit with Aaliyah sitting in front of me, and they were trying to have a baby.
Right.
I think of Chloe from even 100 years before that, when she was trying to have a baby.
Right.
And, God, people here prayed and were fervent, and all these miracles have happened. And I mean,
Amen.
if we all have at least one in sitting here, laying out our marriage, it was gone, and God restored it.
Amen.
That is a miracle. I mean, and I'm telling you that.
No, she's right. That was a miracle.
So all these things that, you know, we've been taught and given and thrived on, you know, now it's going to be kind of like, it kind of figure it like a burst, like all those arrows
Yeah,
coming up.
yeah, so
It's gonna
starburst,
burst
right.
open, and we're going to be, you know, something different, but what God really wants us to be. And I do believe that he's been calling this for a long time, and
Yeah.
like I said, I'm kind of thick-headed and Swedish. But I do believe that, you know, it's getting through. And
Yeah.
that, you know, I know that probably my favorite time was when we did serve home and I was cooking every day. And as hard as that was, and as old as I was, because I'm getting old, but there was so much joy in that. And
Right.
not to say that all these other things in between haven't been too, but that just to me that was when your bones hurt at night and you couldn't wait to get up the next day and do it again.
Right.
And do it even better. And, you know, that just, and that's what this is really all about.
This is where we're going to stop for now because it's been like a bunch of hours, and so we should probably eventually end. We need to just keep dreaming this way. This isn't about answers. It's about like imagination, the way Michelle has kept saying. So I'm going to invite the music team to come forward.